Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to the 2022 Stibitz-Wilson Awards in this beautiful Allen Theater. My name is Barbara Karamedjev, and I'm the co-founder of the American Computer and Robotics Museum and also the board president. And I will be your MC today. But before we get started, I'd like to thank all of our generous sponsors and making this event possible. All of us at the museum are so very grateful for all your support. So I would like to start thanking our presenting sponsors, Zoot Enterprise, Ted Nelson, the Nelson and Liz Lettweiler Foundation, the Norm Asbjornson College of Engineering at Montana State University, and Mr. Jerry Orstrom. Thank you kindly. Our supporting sponsors are, I just mentioned them, is MSU Office of the President, MSU College of Letters and Science, Montana Department of Commerce. Thank you. And our contributing sponsors are KBZK, MSU Honors College, Holmes & Turner, First Interstate Bank, the Element Bozeman, and Colorworld Princeton. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, I would like to open tonight's festivities by telling you a little bit about the American Computer and Robotics Museum, and for those of you who have not visited yet. My husband, George, and I opened the museum right here in Bozeman in 1990. And over the next 3 decades, we worked hard to build a small but powerful museum with a collection spanning 4,000 years of information technology, from cuneiform tablets to quantum computing. And artifacts from the museum and its collection have been shown up in Jurassic Park movies.
Our lives are in your hands and you have butterfingers?
I'm totally unappreciated in my time.
That computer in the background with the red blinking lights is the thinking machine CM5. Though George passed away in 2018, I am grateful for a very, very talented group of people who form our board of directors and who are thoughtfully guiding the museum into the future. A few words about Stibitz-Wilson Awards. George first came up with the idea for these awards in 1997. His aim was to recognize the achievements in computer science. The Stibitz Awards are named after George Stibitz, who worked at Bell Labs and laid the foundation for today's digital computing devices. And the first recipients of that award were honored for a range of achievements ranging from handheld calculator, the integrated circuit, microprocessor, and ENIAC. In fact, one of those very first Stibitz Awards recipients is here tonight. Mr. Maury Irvine was honored in 1997 for his work on Tradak, the first transistoride-based computer. Maury, would you wave to the crowd so we can applaud you? In 2006, E.O. Wilson received the Stibitz Award for his work developing the Electronic Encyclopedia of Life. In 2009, George added Wilson's name to the awards with his permission, and he wanted to acknowledge the vision for the programs, expanding the computing power that helps us understand the biodiversity and ecology. This is Ed Wilson signing books across the street at Country Bookshelf during one of his visits to Bozeman. I'd like to recognize a few other past honorees who are here in the audience today. And if you can stand as I say your name, but audience, please wait till we finish through the last one. Thank you. David Andes for invention of the first neural computer. Rufus Kahn for groundbreaking contribution to quantum memory. John Hemingway for distinguished nature filmography. Bob Metcalfe for a seminal contribution to the development of Ethernet. Gary Strobel for advancing our understanding of antibacterial, antifungal, and bioactive plant components. And David Ward for exploring microbial diversity, ecology, and evolution of the thermal hot springs. Thank you all for being part of our celebration. Now, not many of you might know this, but quite a few folks who came to Bozeman to accept Stibitz-Wilson Awards have gone to receive other very, very prestigious honors. And this was something that George was particularly fond of and proud of. Doug Engelbart was awarded National Medal of Technology and Innovation in the year 2000 after receiving the Stibitz Award in 1998. Tim Berners-Lee was knighted by Queen Elizabeth in 2004, 4 years after receiving Stibitz-Wilson Award. Vinton Cerf and Robert Kahn received their Stibitz-Wilson Awards in 1999. 6 years later, they team up again to receive Presidential Medal of Freedom. Ralph Baer received a Stibitz-Wilson Award in 2002 and the National Medal of Technology and Innovation in 2006. And his son, Mark, is with us in the audience today. Mark, where are you? Thank you. Ted Huff, Federico Fagin, and Stanley Mazur became National Medal of Technology recipients in 2010, 9 years after receiving the Stibitz Awards here in Bozeman. Leroy Hood and Mary Barenbaum each followed up their Stibitz-Wilson Award with the National Medal of Science in 2013 and 2014, respectively. And 2 Stibitz-Wilson honorees follow up their appearances here in Bozeman with the appearances in Oslo to receive Nobel Prizes. Yes, Jack Kilby received the Nobel Prize in 2000, 3 years after receiving Stibitz, and Jennifer Doudna received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2020, 3 years after receiving Stibitz-Wilson Award. All of this is to say that the talent that appear on this Stibitz-Wilson stage through the years is truly staggering, and tonight, today, it's no exception. Before we meet our 2022 honorees, I'd like to welcome my son, Dr. Mark Karamedjev, to the stage. Mark and his sister Helen quite literally grew up in the museum, which they often refer to, only half-jokingly, as the third sibling. Mark is a technical program manager at Planet Labs PBC and spent a decade with the federal government after earning his PhD in astrophysics. He currently serves on the museum board of directors. Mark, come to the stage. Thank you.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us at the lovely Ellen Theater. It's truly a pleasure to be on stage at the theater where Jurassic Park scared the bejesus out of me back in 1993. I wanted to take a couple of minutes to provide some context on how special it is to be having the Stibitz-Wilson Awards this year. It's fair to say the last Stibitz Awards in the fall of 2018 had a good chance of being the last one. As many of you know, only 3 months after those awards were handed out, my father, the co-founder and creative vision behind the American Computer and Robotics Museum, passed away. Let me take a minute to tell you a bit about my father, George Karamedjev. This museum was my father's true passion in life. When the troubles of our world wore him down, working on the museum, whether research and new exhibits, talking to pioneers of the information age, or hunting on eBay for the next acquisition, restored his faith in humanity. It invigorated him and was an outlet for his seemingly bottomless intellectual appetite. My father created the ACRM because he knew there was nothing else like it on Earth. He knew. He had traveled to the corners of the world and practically everywhere in between. His travels revealed the lack of intellectual space to celebrate the varied achievements that have brought us to where we are. He wove together strands of learning and history in a unique way that doesn't just inform, it inspires. I want to share with you the mission statement of the museum. I doubt anyone here knows it. I barely remember it and helped write it. But it goes, the American Computer and Robotics Museum inspires visitors of all ages to explore the past and imagine the future of the information age through thought-provoking exhibits, innovative storytelling, and the bold exchange of ideas. How fitting is that? It is the reason we are here today. And when my father passed, the luminary who saw this vision, who, with the help of my mother, willed it into existence, there was an enormous void. His passing was an unexpected shock. As a family, we were adrift, but so thankful to this community for stepping in and showing support. George's friends came out en masse to his funeral the Saturday after Thanksgiving of 2018, and the Bozeman Daily Chronicle wrote a beautiful article celebrating his life. The end of the article had an ominous tone, noting that it was unclear if the ACRM would remain open. With the exception of a handful of people, I don't think you all realize how true that statement was. When I asked my mom, Barbara Karamedjev, the other force co-founding the museum, what sort of runway did we have to work with, she plainly stated we had about 6 weeks of funding. That would basically take us into January of 2019, before the museum would have to shutter for good. At that point, I summarized our options and sent my mom an email listing out what I saw as our path forward. Either we could, 1, close the museum permanently and find new homes for the acquisitions, 2, keep the museum open but on life support and just limp along, or 3, go for gold and make the museum even more than it currently is. Of course, without hesitation, Barbara chose option 3, to realize the ultimate goal for the ACRM. With encouragement from my sister Helen, we got to work. We built a threadbare plan, raised funds to hire a new executive director, and fund the ACRM for 12 months of operations. The argument was that would buy us the time and expertise needed to get things going. So we can go to the next slide, because the first miracle in making this happen was our dear friend Art Wolf, former director of the Museum of the Rockies. He offered his consulting services pro bono to get us through the first year. The second miracle was we raised that necessary $200,000 in less than a month. We found ourselves thankful to this community for a second time that fall. From there, we busied ourselves on hiring an executive director, and we were fortunate enough to find Eleanor Barker. Unfortunately, she cannot join us today, but was instrumental in setting up this whole thing, and we are really thankful to her for how much work she did to get this going. But when we hired her, we were not expecting to find a Bozeman local for the job, and we were downright lucky to find someone with the exact right fortitude and sense of adventure to embark on this challenge. We had good momentum after hiring. That summer, we built a real board, which you can show the next slide, and had an amazing offsite that resulted in a grand strategic plan. This is that initial board when we pulled it all together, and it resulted in this strategic plan. And please read it if you haven't. It's available on our website, and it's a source of pride, partially because Eleanor is such an amazing writer and really put this together, but the chairman of the board at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California, read it and said he was jealous of how well put together it was. So as we were starting to get this momentum underneath us, then COVID. I know the pandemic is still raw and unpleasant to recall, and there's lots of sadness from that. But in addition, the pandemic was sort of a disaster for nonprofits. We found ourselves for the second time in 2 years discussing whether we needed to close the ACRM. Through the leadership of Barbara, Eleanor, and a resolute board, we navigated that rocky path and only had to close the museum for a few months. A good example of our dynamicism was that Eleanor sprang to action as soon as the first PPP loans were announced and secured funding to help continue keeping the museum in operation even while we were closed for a few months. So, finally, we get running toward the fall of 2021, and we're ready to have the Stibitz-Wilson Awards. The date was set, our illustrious honorees were selected, and COVID Delta. Rightly so, our honorees in the museum felt it was unwise to have an award ceremony at peak COVID, so we had to postpone. So we again thank our honorees, Paula, Craig, and Steve, for sticking with us and agreeing to come back 1 year later. Now we find ourselves 4 years after the last award ceremony back. I am so happy that the ACRM survived this series of otherwise cataclysmic events. It is a magical place. It is magical that a place like the ACRM exists in Bozeman. It brightens the whole valley and is an intellectual tide that rises all boats. The museum is stronger than it has ever been, and we are chartering a bold course for the future. My father would be proud of where we have taken the ACRM, and I am happy to share this renaissance with you all. So thank you, and we'll move on to the next part of the program. Nature, science, history, biography, travel, the American West, the Arabian Peninsula, and Africa. While he earned many awards, his greatest aspiration has been to change minds. John will be presenting a Stibitz-Wilson Award to Dr. Paula Apsell. Come on up, John.
I have to tell you, first of all, that I've been a friend and a employee of Paula Apsell over the years, and so I tell you all this from my heart. The importance of science as a pillar of society has never been more essential today than at any other time, in my opinion. I need not tell you how frequently science has been debunked, vilified, and disparaged by politicians to suit their ambitions. Just count how many science fundamentals are being challenged at this very moment. The age of the earth, evolution and the origins of humanity, the efficacy of vaccines, the structure of the universe, the individual's right to choose medical procedures, the cause of climate change. In fact, the existence of climate change. And I could go on. So who can we trust? Who speaks for science? Who is its ombudsman? Who is its mouthpiece, if you will? Since 1975, the answer has been a four-letter word, NOVA. PBS's primetime homage to science, remarkable for its integrity, lack of competitors, longevity, and consistent excellence. And behind that remarkable achievement stands one name, Paula Apsell. Paula was and is a formidable presence. Few of us who have answered to her professionally ever left a rough cut screening unbloodied. Lesson 1, never show Paula Apsell your rough cut on a Friday afternoon. Friday afternoons were certain recipes for disaster. Imagine working long days and nights for months only to be told by Paula on a Friday afternoon to start all over again. Listen, she would declare, if my mother can't understand the film, no one else will. You've got the weekend to make sense of it for my mother. And what a sleepless weekend you had in store. Almost always, such pain yielded results. Trial by Paula made NOVA the matchless institution it is today. Consider some of its many achievements: the fabric of the cosmos, evolution, the miracle of life, making North America, human origins with Don Johanson, Holocaust escape tunnel, Shackleton's Antarctic adventure, and I could go on. More or less 20 a year. Paula will tell you that she was inspired to devote her life to science after meeting her husband, Sheldon, a physicist who, amongst many achievements, helped design strategic reconnaissance satellites. Since then, Paula has been the link between brilliant, questing minds and us, the viewer. She explains her private mission in a few words. Science is way too important to belong only to scientists. And globally, Paula believes science helps build societies. Building bridges between science and society is what she has done over a long and illustrious career. And that is why I am so proud tonight to introduce my former boss, my friend, and a true inspiration for all of us, Paula Apsell.
Thank you.
Now, John, I was really not that bad, was I? I thought I was pretty nice. But thank you for your beautiful words. I am incredibly touched. I can't describe it. You know, when you sit there and you see your life go by in a way, but really, I have to say, I can't remember anyone ever saying such nice things about me, so I'm deeply grateful. Thank you. So, first of all, to begin with, I want to thank you all for this great honor and for enabling me to visit the beautiful city of Bozeman and your wonderful American Computer and Robotics Museum, and listen to Barbara, who was an amazing storyteller, take us around the museum for a couple of hours, and I could have listened all day. But I am indeed honored to be among this esteemed group of honorees, Craig and Steve. It's something that simply is unimaginable to me, and I thank you again for including me. I started at WGBH, the public television station in Boston, in 1969 as the station log typist, a job that for decades has mercifully been automated. PBS itself would launch the next year, propelled by Newton Mino's powerful speech about a decade earlier, in which he called commercial television, truthfully, a great wasteland. A few years later, my dear friend and mentor, Michael J. Ambrosino, would start NOVA, as he described it, science adventures for curious grown-ups. Much in media has changed since then, but NOVA remains, heading toward its 50th season, 35 of which I had the great privilege of running as executive producer. Those 35 years were filled with excitement, as were the many years before that, during which I produced and wrote several NOVA episodes. Every day, I felt as though I had been given a front row seat on some of the most amazing scientific developments of our time. Long before most of us dreamed of owning a laptop, I made a documentary on artificial intelligence, featuring Arthur C. Clarke, Marvin Minsky, the computer therapist Eliza, and many other pioneers. My colleague Graham Chedd and I made the first documentary on television on genetic engineering, long before DNA or my fellow honoree, Craig Venter, were household words. I had the great honor of making a documentary on the eradication of smallpox, still the only disease that human beings have wiped off the face of the earth. And beginning in the mid-1980s, we made more than 20 films on climate change. I could go on about the breakthroughs and paradigm shifts, the failures and successes I had the privilege to witness while making and supervising more than 700 NOVA episodes. But since I'm ancient enough to know that a picture is worth 1,000 words, I'll give you a look at some of the work my colleagues and I did at NOVA.
Keep our fingers crossed. Let's hope. And pray. Okay. All right, we are into high electrification in the anvil.
Still getting a few precipitation particles through the instrument.
Are we alone? I think it's the grandest of all scientific questions.
This will be the most exciting adventure we've ever undertaken on Mars.
Coming up on entry. We are in powered flight. Sky crane has started.
Tango Delta nominal.
UTIP is good. Touchdown confirmed. We're safe on Mars.
Why don't we ever see events unfold in reverse order? According to the laws of physics, this can happen.
Every bone that came out of the ground was something brand new to science. It was really amazing.
I became deeply interested in understanding who are you in this world? What is the nature of my experience?
We're the Starsky and Hutch of science nerds. We are seeing actual atoms. Isn't this a historic technological achievement?
We still don't know the origin of life. We wonder if life was once on Mars.
Isn't the trouble with your job the not knowing?
That is not the trouble, that is the seduction.
Let's get moving.
So I retired from NOVA in 2019. As you might guess, it was not an easy transition. But it wasn't long before I flunked retirement due to a film that I had worked on while at NOVA. In June 2016, I happened to be on location in Vilnius, Lithuania, when, as our cameras rolled, a group of geoarchaeologists using a technology called electrical resistivity tomography, ERT, made a profoundly moving discovery. A tunnel secretly dug by 80 Jewish prisoners forced to exhume and burn the remains of thousands of Jews murdered by Germans and their Lithuanian collaborators. During the early days of the Holocaust, what was known as the Holocaust of bullets. Unbeknownst to their captors, these shackled prisoners, members of this so-called burning brigade, spent their nights digging a tunnel. On the last night of Passover in 1943, they climbed into the tunnel to make their escape. Most were shot, but 12 made it to the forest where Jewish partisans were waiting to rescue them. That film was transformational for me. Both in and out of Jewish environments, I've encountered people who see European Jews as passive victims who did little to help themselves during the time of the Nazis. But Holocaust Escape Tunnel, the documentary we ultimately made about the discovery in Ponar, led me on a path that revealed just how untrue and even mythical that is. I've learned that acts like those of the tunnel builders in Ponar were indeed extensive, varied, and prevalent, with arms and without, in ghettos, forests, and death camps. For the past 2.5 years, I've devoted myself to telling that story in a documentary feature that is now almost complete called Resistance, They Fought Back. Let's take a look.
You have a contradiction between what people thought and what actually happened.
People have this myth stuck in their heads that the Jews went to their deaths like sheep to the slaughter. But this is where the real story begins.
You can't say that the Jews were silent. That's absolute nonsense. The Jews were armed. They were ready to resist.
It's hard to excavate, but we are sure there are weapons still in these places.
The prisoners were able to collect a number of knives and very primitive grenades.
Escaping is a form of resistance.
You're not going to break my humanity.
There's no way you can put a value on that kind of resistance. That stays forever.
So this is the story that gives you power to live.
Jews did not go as sheep to the slaughter. They fought back.
Thank you. Our society's understanding of the Holocaust, even after all these decades, is limited, misunderstood, and frighteningly transient. Surveys indicate that 2/3 of millennials in the United States cannot identify the infamous concentration camp Auschwitz or any of thousands of ghettos or death camps. 20% of young adults in New York responded to surveys that Jews caused the Holocaust, and many people deny it ever happened. Of course, as a science journalist, I'm used to that. Every episode we ever broadcast on evolution received a cascade of critical mail and threats to defund us. I received endless emails insisting that the Earth is young and that global warming is a hoax. But that's exactly why now, at a time when truth is challenged by misinformation, competing narratives, and populist movements, we need institutions like your wonderful computer museum, programs like NOVA, and especially the scientist and engineer who will follow me on this podium tonight. Thank you again for this honor.
Thank you, Paula, for those thoughtful comments. We will actually be hearing more from our honorees during the Q&A session, so there'll be after we have these presentations like this, there'll be an opportunity for everyone here to ask questions. Now let's welcome our next presenter to the stage. Dr. Blake Wiedenheft earned his PhD studying viruses that thrive in boiling acid environments like those found in Yellowstone National Park. He then accepted a postdoc fellowship in Jennifer Doudna's laboratory at UC Berkeley, you remember the one who got the Nobel Prize, where he initiated work on CRISPR-based adaptive immune systems and their self-applications for genomic engineering. Blake joined the faculty at MSU in 2012, and his research team aims to understand the mechanisms of viral defense and evolutionary outcomes of biological conflict. Blake will be presenting a Stibitz-Wilson Award to our next honoree, Dr. Craig Ventnor.
All right, good evening, curious people. I'm Blake Wiedenheft, and tonight is my honor to introduce Craig Ventnor, who personifies what Ed and George imagined when they joined forces in 1997 to create the Wilson Stibitz Award, which is designed to honor the innovators at the cutting edge of computational and biological sciences, two disciplines that Craig Ventnor has married throughout his career. Unlike John and Paula, I don't know Craig to that extent, but what I know about Craig Ventnor comes from my experience as a molecular biologist, what I've learned from his 2 books, and let's be honest, his Wikipedia page, reading a few dozen of his hundreds of scientific manuscripts, and a few shared conversations over the last 24 hours. And here's what I think I know about Craig Ventnor. He's a rebel. He's an intellectual iconoclast. He's an adventurer, but above all, he's a doer above a dreamer. Craig Ventnor was a Navy corpsman in Vietnam that came home and got hooked on science. After earning a BS in biochemistry and a PhD in physiology and pharmacology, he initiated his own research program, initially in New York, and then subsequently at the NIH, where he developed a new technology called ESTs, or express sequence tags, that dramatically accelerated the pace of gene discovery. But this was just the first in the series of innovative, transformative innovations. In 1995, Craig and his team decoded the first genome of any living organism using a technique that he invented called shotgun sequencing, which fundamentally changed how and how fast genome sequences can be determined. Prior to this innovation, sequencing was done using a process called walking, which is just as tedious and methodical as it sounds. But Craig proposed a bold new idea, one that involved taking all of the DNA from a sample and running it through what's akin to a molecular cheese grater, shredding all of the DNA that you were trying so hard to preserve into tiny little fragments that he sequenced in parallel, and then using new computational methods that they invented, found the pieces of the DNA that overlapped, and like a puzzle, stitched the whole thing back together, creating the entire genome sequence. And this was the technology that Craig and his team eventually used to determine the sequence of the human genome, providing a molecular basis for understanding human nature. But sequencing was never itself really the goal. It's really about understanding what this information teaches us about life. So I'll leave you with a quote from Dr. Ventnor himself from his second book, Life at Light Speed, where he summarizes the field with this perspective. Quote, "In science, the fields of chemistry, biology, and computing have come together successfully in my own discipline of genomics. Digital computers designed by DNA machines," think George Stibitz, "are now used to read the coded instructions in DNA, to analyze them and to write them in such a way as to create new kinds of DNA machines, end quote. Or in other words, to create synthetic life. Clearly, Dr. Venter's career has been at the forefront of computational and biological sciences, but he has also been committed to understanding the ethical implications of his work and the ongoing evolution of this field. Please join me in welcoming Craig Venter.
Well, thank you for the amazing introduction, and thank you, I think, to the organizers for having me follow Paula. I mean, I sequenced the human genome, and I have to follow such an amazing set of accomplishments that Nova taught me so much of the science that I knew and learned about other worlds. So, Paula, thank you, and it's an honor to be sharing this award with you and with Steve. Awards basically are determined, their importance is determined by who gets them, and this award has one of the most amazing sets of honorees that I've seen anywhere, and it's one of the reasons that I was so pleased to come here and accept it. And also, the late E.O. Wilson was a very good friend. I'm very sorry he's not here. I think he wanted to be for this award presentation. He and I shared the King Faisal Prize more than a decade and a half ago, and we had to spend a long week together in Riyadh. And he taught me, as we went through all the ruins of the earlier Saudi civilization, looking for ants amongst the ruins and teaching me about them. And given what the alternatives were in a society with no alcohol, I became truly fascinated with ants in Saudi Arabia. Ed became a long-term friend and advisor to our global sampling expedition as we tried to catalog the microbial life around the oceans. One of the things I like so much about this award is, as was said in the introduction, it combines computing with biology. And even back at NIH in the late 80s and early 90s, computing was considered some technical thing that belonged in the computing center, was not part of biology. I tried to hire and promote a computational biologist and was told they don't belong in biology, they should just join the computer center. And that's what helped prompt me to leave NIH to start my own institute. And computing is a key aspect of every breakthrough that I've been associated with. Even though I've had no training in computational biology, I've had good sense to hire some of the best people in the world, such as Gene Myers, who wrote all the algorithms for assembling the human genome. But in 1989, my team built the third largest civilian computer in the world to assemble the first human genome. And it was a key part of our understanding of the tens of millions of microbes we discovered in the ocean. Basically, we used DNA sequencing as our window on the world. Instead of trying to culture microorganisms, which resulted in less than 1/10,000th of the world being known, we just isolated all the DNA and RNA and sequenced it. and put it back together computationally to reorganize the world and the computer. It's an amazingly powerful tool that is now being used extensively to understand environments everywhere, and showed us, again, much to contrary thinking, that microbes in the ocean are amongst the most abundant species. Again, the limitation in science is ironically what people before you have or haven't done. And the thinking gets limited by that institutional thinking. Discoveries in microbiology were made by culturing organisms, and if you couldn't grow it in culture, they didn't exist. So organisms in the ocean, such as the Sargasso Sea surrounding Bermuda, were numbered one at a time, and they were up to 11 when our team discovered approximately 2 million more. So some people think my most brilliant idea in science was not how to sequence the human genome or make synthetic life, but that I managed to find a way to sail my boat around the world doing science and getting paid for it, which truly angered some of my Department of Energy colleagues who said, we're stuck in acid mines and inventors out on some beach in the South Pacific. I've had wonderful teams. Genomics is very much a team science. It's not based on one or two individuals. I've had the privilege of being the team leader, but it really takes an army to do this work. But because of the breakthrough we had in computational science and computers, our army was 1,000 times smaller than the government's army. I was visiting different heads of state. I was in Abu Dhabi visiting the Crown Prince in his private tent. He said, I only have one question for you. I said, what's that? He goes, tell me how you defeated the US government. So I'm known for lots of things I didn't prefer to be known by, but at the same time, we were glad we were able to do that. So I'm also here with my wife, Heather, who helped me through the storms of sequencing the genome and everything since, and we're excited to be here. Paula, congratulations, and I'm delighted to be sharing the platform with you, and Steve Wozniak, who I've shared the stage with on various occasions, and this is indeed a privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Venter, for that wonderful message and insights. Now I'd like to invite or welcome Dr. John Paxton to the stage. John joined Montana State University in 1990, same time the museum opened, so coincidence. Following the completion of his graduate studies at the University of Michigan, John is a computer science professor at MSU and currently serves as the founding director of the Gianforte School of Computing. John is with us tonight to present a Stibitz-Wilson Lifetime Achievement Award to Steve Wozniak, who, as you probably figured out, due to scheduling conflicts, was unfortunately unable to attend in person, but John visited with Steve via video, and he'd like to share that with us now. Come on up, John.
Great. Well, thank you, Mark, and good evening, everyone. So I only had the pleasure of meeting Steve once before, back when he received his first Stibitz Award in Bozeman 20-some years ago. But I will say that as a computer science student at Ohio State, between my first and second years, I spent lots of time on an Apple II, writing a Apple Basic Office payroll program for my parents, and so I feel like I know Steve's products from that experience well. All right, so a Silicon Valley icon, technology entrepreneur, and philanthropist for more than 40 years, Steve Wozniak has helped shape the computing industry with his design of Apple's first line of products, the Apple I and II. He also influenced the popular Macintosh. In 1976, Wozniak and Steve Jobs founded Apple Computer, Inc. with Wozniak's Apple I personal computer. Wozniak is the author of I Was, From Computer Geek to Cult Icon, his New York Times bestselling autobiography. His television appearances include ABC's Dancing with the Stars, The Big Bang Theory, The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, Conan, The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon, and Celebrity Watch Party. Not a typical computer science trajectory, by the way. During it all, Wozniak has delivered thousands of talks and fireside chats, thrilling audiences and inspiring the next generation of entrepreneurs and engineers. Due to prior engagements that prevented him from attending this year's Stibitz Awards, Barbara Karamidgev and I were honored to have a 10-minute discussion with Steve, videotaped earlier this summer, and 2 kind of points about Paula. So when Barbara and I had the opportunity to talk to Steve, this was a kind of a Zoom call, we were told by his scheduler, Steve's scheduler, his wife, we had exactly 10 minutes and there were no double takes. So we just had to roll with our first effort. So please enjoy our recorded conversation. Thank you.
Hi, Steve. This is Barbara Karamidgev at the American Computer and Robotics Museum. And joining me here is Dr. John Paxton from Gianforte School of Computing at Montana State University here in Bozeman. We're so excited to celebrate your Lifetime Achievement Award, and hard to believe it's been over 20 years since you've been here in Bozeman to receive Stibitz Awards for Apple I and Apple II computers and co-founding Apple Computer Company. We are also so very grateful to you for your generous donation of Apple I computer. And it is the stellar exhibit, and it's the most popular exhibit in our museum. So thank you again. Well, in the years since, you and Apple's place in history of technology has achieved legendary status. So we are very, very pleased to honor you with this Lifetime Achievement Award for your numerous contributions to the world of computing. And here's Dr. John Paxton with some questions and career achievements. Thanks, Steve.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. And Steve, it's an honor to be able to meet you and ask you a couple questions here. So the first one is, an observation. Computing continues to evolve rapidly. In your opinion, why is it important for museums to record this history?
Well, first of all, just in general about museums, I mean, we're born with curiosity, and our curiosity extends to the past as well as the future. I mean, who doesn't go to museums, and have striking memories of seeing things that you don't really see necessarily every day? And the great computing world we live in today, a lot of people are born now and just think, oh, this is the status quo, this is the way it's always been. And they don't really, they don't get that many clues like in textbooks in schools. So going to museums and actually seeing things that develop is sort of striking. It's striking emotionally, and emotional is what really brings the importance of things to you. And, the world we live in is obviously very important today. Very honored to get this award. And, but, I am so proud of the museum, American Computing Museum. But, some aspects of our culture that are important today, how we live our lives today, are really the result of steps and changes throughout time of what we had before. And it's very hard for, people to go back decades, 3 decades, 4 decades, 5 decades and say, oh my gosh, what was the role of technology back then? And it's like so strange a world. It's almost like we're taught about, forerunners to ourselves hundreds of years back, living very differently. Now, computing and technology, of course, is kind of like mathematics. You make a discovery, you build on it, you make something a little better, you make it better the next year. And, you know, and those kind of discoveries, it's one leads to another, and that's the basis of exponential growth. One thing you always hear all the time in the news, oh, we're under exponential growth. Things are growing so fast, you can't stop it. And that's what happened with computers over the last 4 or 5 decades. Computing technology, you know, leading up to now our lifestyle. And most people look at today's world, but don't really have a good idea of what led to it. Most people don't. Some people kind of study it. It's important to them. They're into technology. They're technologists, but not the normal people. And what thoughts went through people's head that took us from something older to something better? Something better. What were those thoughts? What were people thinking? What were their abilities? What tools did they have? What resources? And resources is almost always the most important thing, because science, technology, science of physics and chemistry, real sciences, you know, make a lot of difference, and they make newer products possible than the prior year. And you have to wait for the next scientific discovery to ripple through and improve our products very much. Maybe you discover that a certain atom implanted in the chips that make all our products, that certain atom implanted now makes them faster than they were and able to do more, let's say, work for humans. And technology, of course, has been changing faster than anything in our history. Anyone who's close to technology will tell you that. And the user interface, how we humans deal with our technology, it's not a given. It has changed the most of all. Almost every advance we've had, right down to today's smartphones, is improving the way devices work with a human and are understandable by the human and make the human importance. So, you know, I almost always think, even as a designer, that these little micro changes down at the atom level lead eventually up to the great products of our life, our computers and iPhones and everything that they do for us. I mean, what product or category of life isn't affected by technology these days?
Great, well, thank you. Also, from your perspective as a computer pioneer in the 1970s and 80s, what are surprising aspects of computing today?
I couldn't go back to the 60s, but the early start of PCs, 70s, 80s, man, so much was going on then. But when we started Apple, for example, let's say mid-70s, we started Apple, and the amount of memory that would hold one song cost close to $1 million. Did we ever think, oh my gosh, these devices are someday going to be playing music for us? We're going to have an iPod. You just can't imagine it's going to happen. Oh, Moore's law, exponential growth says eventually, of course it'll happen. You'll have a little chip with 500 movies on one little tiny chip. Moore's law says that, but the trouble is, when is Moore's law going to reach a peak and atomically not be able to improve anymore? So it was very difficult to foresee what we have today. In the early days, PCs, empowered the individual and made a small individual with a little computer able to do things that before only huge companies with huge expensive mainframes could do. And really, I was very involved in that, and a lot of people that I was around in clubs involved in empowering the individual, making the individual be able to solve their own problems without having to turn to somebody else, that had a lot of money and power, like a corporation. Well, today, though, the internet, and the cloud that we hear so much about make big technologies able to control us even more. In other words, we were supposedly going to escape the control and be on our own, able to do even better work with our own computers. But now we kind of have to go through all the big ones and the major apps, and all of our data goes out somewhere into computers on the internet and comes back to us. We didn't foresee that happening. The key to that was bandwidth. How much data can you send per second, and how can you send it mobilely over cellular? So there were a lot of things that, to an engineer, it wasn't that easy to predict necessarily. And today, even simple things have to use the cloud. And the example is, oh my gosh, there's things that are almost equivalent to pushing a button and your door opens, except your button push has to go out over the internet and then come back saying open the door. Those sort of things aren't really what we intended from the start. You were going to be in control, and nowadays, to sell the products, there's, eventually industries result in a few very large companies, and they're kind of run the show, and there's less need for them to make a product really well, feel really good to the user and make it feel this is the way it should work. There's less need to be able to sell the products. You're just in a position, they're going to buy your next product. It's also very hard these days to feel like an owner of things. In the early days, bought a computer, you owned it, you used it your way, you put it in a closet, you protected it. And nowadays, oh my gosh, I was just get into cybersecurity and hackers and all that stuff. But really, you don't necessarily own things. You can buy even a car, and all of a sudden one day, there's an update to the car, and everything works differently. Some features got taken out, or they got put into a totally different mode to use, and that doesn't feel like I own it. If I set the temperature, when I get back, is the temperature where I set it? No. These things are just popping around with cars. You know, a lot of technology nowadays tries to think for you and do things. What would you like it to do? And boy, that messes up when it misses. So updates often mess things up, make them harder to use, or they introduce new bugs, fixing older bugs. And the problem I hate is when things don't work. You know, you get in there and you do what seems logical to solve a problem, and whether it's tapping or typing on a computer, and it just doesn't work. And that just drives me up the wall. You know, when I feel as a human it should work, it should. The human should always be more important than the technology. That's what I consider Apple to have been about, especially in the days moving to our, you know, mouse-based, see things on a screen, menus and all that. Moving to that world from memorizing strict commands that you just typed on a keyboard to get everything done. It's very hard these days. Now, you have to subscribe to things. Okay, a certain amount of money per month. That is like a credit card. It hides it from you what the real total cost of what you're buying is. And I think it makes it for the producers able to take advantage of the consumers. And because it's hard to judge a value and say, this is the total amount I'm spending. Here's what I have. It will be here forever at my disposal. And it's worth that much. It's hard to judge that when everything's a subscription and the rates might change and you're just not in control. It's part of that non-ownership thing. So these are some of the things that have happened in computing that, you know, we didn't necessarily expect or want in the past. Go back and look, you know, an early Apple II didn't connect to an internet. Nobody could get into it. It couldn't be modified except by yourself. And it was great time because it said, computers should be fun. The Apple II was the first time ever arcade games became color. Think how important color is to our fun in life and enjoyment of things. But the Apple II was the first time ever that arcade games that people love to play, especially young people, that they became software. That meant a 9-year-old kid could write a good game in one day instead of a skilled engineer like me hooking 1,000 wires up and getting a new game prototype in, 6 months to a year. So we were also taught today that a lot of the good things that come to us, that computer technology always improves humans, but we're taught that it's AI, artificial intelligence. I agree with the A, and I do not agree with the I. It kind of fools us into thinking that this AI stuff, these little computer decision makers are like a brain, and we're not close to the brain of an ant yet with computers. And the sort of things that get solved. We don't know how the brain is structured. We don't know how it works. We don't even know that our memories are in the brain. So thinking we understand what intelligence is, we're still a ways from that if we ever do get there. Our lives these days also are very dependent on technology. That wasn't necessarily true in the earlier days, but everything you do in life, think at the end of the day, you've used 30 apps on your phone. What would you have done in the past if you didn't have those apps? And the answers are very hard to come up with. Oh my gosh, I'd have to do everything physically and whatever. So we like things to get made easy, like remote control, but it also makes us dependent on it, and that takes over our lives quite a bit. And so all the steps that we took to get this technology working for humans in human ways is very important to we technologists, but also to regular people. You go, whoever you are, you might go to a museum one day, on potatoes and just, enjoy learning. So that's one, and education is one of the greatest parts of our life. And I'm glad we are born so curious.
There's no doubt we live in a very different world today than we did 50 years ago. The world is very fast-paced because of all of these computer developments. What are your strategies for maintaining a work-life balance? This will be my final question, and then once you respond, I'll turn things back over to Barbara to wrap things up.
Well, you know what? I've met a lot of people that talk about, time to back off in life, relax, think it out, and take another step forward. Life gets hard at times. work life is, pretty much, oh my gosh, if you're just, you have to constantly get work done. It's like an obligation. And it's like you're following it. And it's not like you're saying, here's what I'd like to do. Some of us are lucky. We find the occupation that is what we love to do. And that leads to happiness. And happiness is the key to life. Not success, not how much money you make, not what title you get, not how much respect. It's really how happy were you, in your life. And that involves a lot, the happiness in the job. And one thing is I've noticed that when people are happy with their job, like I've had kids, and if they're happy with their job, they love the people they're working with. And if they're not happy with their job, oh, my boss is so horrible and that. So we almost should have psychologists working as CEOs and management to make sure that when we form a team, it's not based on skills. Grab these skills from somebody who has these courses in college, but actually get people who are similar enough that they're going to like being around each other and doing things together, even outside of work. So keep that happiness. And anyway, I'm so glad for this award, and I'm very thankful to the American Computer Museum, of course.
Well, thank you for sharing your wisdom, Steve. I'll turn things back over to Barbara.
Steve, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I'm so happy to see you. We will miss you terribly. I was so looking forward to seeing you, chatting with you, and showing out these fantastic exhibits we have in here. So, of course, you're welcome to come anytime. We roll the red carpet for you. Stop by and visit us in lovely Montana. Thank you again. Thank you.
And now I'm just going to turn it over to Barbara for some closing remarks.
Before I close this wonderful evening, I just would like to extend my deepest thanks and gratitude to, of course, our honorees, and also for somebody who could not be here with us today, which is Eleanor Barker. She was instrumental in making this evening possible. Without her, truly, it wouldn't have happened. So it breaks my heart that she's not here with us this evening, because she worked so diligently, so hard for so long to make this evening possible. So if you can give her some applause, because she worked so hard. And thank you so much for joining us here tonight. I'd just like to say a few more words about George and his passion for science, and this has been an ongoing theme through the whole evening, which would warm his heart, because as you all know, this is what George lived for. You know what? His love for science, learning, and knowledge was insatiable. He really, really loved it. He believed that telling the story of how he arrived to this magnificent advancement that we're making today is worthwhile telling. He knew that science defines us and that it drives us. And he put a great emphasis on historical and social context on which these discoveries are made in the museum. So I am very, very proud to carry in George's tradition and keep an emphasis on the passion for science and learning at the American Computer and Robotics Museum. So hope you enjoy the evening. Hope you learned something. And we look forward to seeing you at the American Computer and Robotics Museum. Thank you very much.